Matt called me out earlier for referring to programmatic as a thing, and I feel like the question I'm about ready to ask you is referring to mobile as a thing, but okay, is mobile still so nascent in its, in its sort of usage, like the user journey, the usage paradigm, the consumption paradigm, how fast it's growing, that do you really need to fully integrate media, the activation, the creative? Like, has it settled into a traditional media norm where you can sort of activate it like you do other mediums? Is it there yet?
I think it's mostly there yet, but very few people are doing it. So again, if you have a look at the amount of advertisers that are even creating enough mobile formats to run, whether it's in programmatic, whether it's in publisher direct, whether they've actually got the right tools and technologies to measure mobile specific stuff. So are they using a mobile first DSP? Are they using mobile first ad serving technologies? Have they got a landing page environment that is actually optimized for mobile and
what the hell is a mobile-first DSP? And what does that mean? Does that mean they're only buying mobile? Does that mean that mobile, if you look at a sort of cross-device strategy of like reach and frequency, that mobile is the first screen with which you hit them because it's the most personal device?
Fundamentally, they're businesses that have started from thinking about mobile first and a world, I guess, where their cookies may not be as relevant because of apps, because of iOS and Apple, because of all these different nuances around the mobile environment. It is different to desktop. And some of the businesses that have grown out of desktop have struggled to understand those nuances in mobile.
Okay. Can you just sort of take me through, like, what does that investment planning look like from a media perspective for a brand that would fit into that bucket for you? Where do they start? Because it feels really overwhelming, right?
Yes. Yeah, and we actually want our clients to get their assets mobilized first. And even in this day and age, and you can see all this web traffic and all this, all of these conversions and all of these important elements of consumer behavior getting done on their mobile. Every time you catch the subway, every time you're in a supermarket, you see that behavior. Clients just aren't there yet. They're still not creating the right size and enough ads, even for a mobile campaign. I'm not saying that ads are just a solution. They're not thinking about mobile native. They're not thinking about creating content that can be consumed just by a mobile audience. The statistics, and depends on who you believe, there's about 20% of Americans that only use mobile devices. It's their first, second, third, fourth, fifth screen. It is their sole, it is the majority, 90-something% of their time is just on one single device. Brands aren't thinking about that. Even some publishers don't have their sites mobile optimized. I actually, interestingly, had a look through, had a look at many of the companies that are represented here. We're at a tech weekend, conference, and a lot of the websites actually don't even work on mobile, and we're in the industry here. So, there's the backyard isn't even tidy before we get into all of this future-facing ideal state.
Right. So when we look at, if we look at sort of automation, right? If we look at data-driven audience buying, those two things, how is that different for mobile? And do you have to have sort of a bifurcated strategy? If you double down on as a buyer or an agency, a marketer or an agency, you double down on data-driven. You have high integrity of your first-party data set, and you want to automate as possible, akin to sort of what Patrick's leading at Target. Is mobile different, or is mobile just another device on which the media lands? Does it have to be treated differently still?
I think it does. So I think there are enough nuances around, again, the devices, the environments, the operating systems, the rules, how different app ecosystems work, that you need to think about it differently, and there aren't many people who do or are capable of doing that. I think that when you have a look at the ability to target cross-screen in an effective way rather than separating campaigns, there's only a few companies that have very accurate data around that. It's your Googles and your Facebooks and Apple obviously have recently resigned from the advertising game. But those guys have the deterministic data to actually understand what is a single user doing across those different devices. Everybody else is using a bit of deterministic, scaling it with some probabilistic, adding data source A, B, C, D, and E, and trying to get to a unique state, but it's actually just decreasing the accuracy along the way.
So what I'm hearing is because it's sort of a house of disparate data sets, it's basically the more you add, the diminished confidence level you have that you're meeting the right audience at the right time. So,
yes.
So what I'm sort of hearing is that ability, as Joanna sort of refers to it, of like automating decisioning to make sure you know to whom you're speaking at the right time at the right place. It feels like we're still a little bit away from that in mobile.
Yes.
Is the UID what's going to change that?
It is, but then you've got Apple's approach to that, which is to try and remove people from being able to target and use that information because it's too personally identifiable. So you've got all these different factors at play all of the time. So then you've got companies that are, fingerprinting or whatever they may call it. So it could be having a look at 100 different elements of my behavior on the phone. What language have I got it set to? What operating system? What phone is it? Behavioral data, where have I been? What have I done? All of this to identify and tie it back to me as a person or a device that's targetable. But how often am I updating that? When companies come out and say, hey, buy our data that's all about new car intenders, first of all, how are they getting that? How fresh is it? And secondly, they're selling it to everybody else as well. So, there's obviously a lot of talk and excitement about data and all these different sources. And every publisher that we meet with goes, hey, plug into our data. It's just part of the conversation now. What does it really mean? What's it really going to add at the end of the day? And it's just understanding and using a lot of your own data, not necessarily buying others and knowing what you're buying. So it's a very complex world with a lot of smoke and mirrors.
So last question real quick. So I'm sure there's a very broad spectrum of percentage of total spend that is mobile across like your client roster or in general. But if you had to say what the multiple is in the next 24 months, so from today, 24 months, what's the multiple on mobile as a percentage of portfolio do you think that a brand should be pacing to if they're truly in touch with their sort of audience and consumer behavior?
When you have a look at a lot of the headlines that say the IAB and others put out, there's mobiles overtaken TV and all of these sort of very exciting headlines. When you actually look behind the data, the majority of that spend is actually Facebook and Google, which are based on estimates because they aren't published. The reason why Facebook and Google make up a really big part of that is because that's where consumers are. So consumers are actually being exposed to those banners and buttons, and those platforms are monetizing it, but it's not their overall intention. It's not the marketer's intention to run more into mobile on those things. It just happens because that's where consumers are. So if you actually back those bits out, and depending again on the stats that you'll read, but it could be 25 to 30% of overall ad spend on mobile. If you actually back out your Googles and your Facebooks, you're in single digits. So the answer to your question about, I guess, mobile specific, mobile direct spend is 3, 4, 5% across the advertising industry.
In 24 months, it should be?
It should be double that on the mobile specific stuff, and the rest will increase organically, just where the audience goes.
Awesome. Thanks, Travis.
Thank you.